that you're putting some things that we're going to address today, and I'm going to share some tools with you that I think will hopefully help in those areas. But let me start first of all, just by telling you a little bit about who I am and where I come from in terms of this idea of collaboration and coalition building. So I have two roles on this call today. First of all, I am a speaker, trainer, and coach with the John Maxwell team. And I always hope that people are familiar with who John Maxwell is, but he is considered to be one of the #1 leadership experts in the world. He's worked in almost every country and does some amazing things in terms of building up leaders, which is important to collaboration and coalition building. I've also had the opportunity both in working in the field of higher education and working with student organizations and their building up of organizations and strengthening collaborations that way, as well as having more than 10 years of experience in the nonprofit world and working with coalitions and helping community partners really be able to not just connect with one another, but really work together effectively and in some ways seamlessly, though I think that's a word that's a little bit overused. So that's the lens that I am bringing today. And part of my role right now in community engagement and training with Children's Trust of South Carolina. So I've got to let you know just a little bit very briefly about who Children's Trust is, because I'm going to be using us at Children's Trust as an example as we go throughout our time together this morning. So big thing for you to know is Children's Trust works statewide. We are headquartered in Columbia. I actually live and work out of Spartanburg. We've got several remote folks all over the state, but our #1 focus is the prevention of abuse and neglect, child abuse and neglect. I can give you all sorts of ways that we do that, but our focus is the prevention of child abuse and neglect, no matter how we are doing that. One of the ways that we do that is we fund local programs and local initiatives. So we are a funder. We're an intermediary organization, which means that we fund service providers. We are not the service providers ourselves. We do work as coaches to help establish local coalitions so that they can both create prevention plans and also implement those plans. There's a lot of work that happens with coaching local coalitions on how to effectively collaborate with one another. So that's the lens that I am bringing today. And I'm super excited to have a partner in this today, someone else that we'll be using really as a case study as we go throughout our time together. Chris Clausen, who is the board chair from Fairfield Forward. And I'm going to have him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about that organization or that coalition.
All right, thank you, Dana. As Dana said, I'm the board chair. I've been board chair for 3 years now. Fairfield Forward, though, has existed as another name. It was even more of a tongue twister. I guess the CCCF, they can appreciate it, was the Fairfield Community Coordinating Council. So that was a mouthful, but they've been around since the 60s, actually, and really have adapted and kind of evolved along the way. So always looking at whatever the need in the community was and taking advantage of whatever resources there were out there to make an impact. So that's the organization.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so you've already answered this question. Several of you have answered this question for me. And again, I appreciate you putting things into the chat. I will say as we go throughout our time, if you have any questions or if you have had experiences that you want to share with folks, I really feel like even though Hannah called us experts, I feel like we're all experts in our own experiences and what we bring to the table. So if you have learned some lessons and you want to share those with everyone, you can put that in the chat box too. We'd love to hear from you. You can also ask questions. I kind of track the chat as I'm going through our time together. So what I want us to think about, we recognize there are challenges in this work, right? Nobody's trying to say this is easy to do. If it was easy to do, you guys wouldn't be here trying to learn how to do it better, right? So why do we need to put in the effort? Why does it matter? Other than the fact that funders ask for it, because I know that matters and that happens. But why is it beneficial and why do funders want to see that? So I love this quote from the original collective impact paper from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, that no single organization is responsible for any major social problem, nor can any single organization cure it. So I am assuming, and I know what can happen when you assume, but I'm going to assume here that all of you are coming at this from a nonprofit or some agency that is focused on addressing a problem. That's usually what we're doing. And those problems may look vastly different from one person to another, but that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And we've got to recognize, I talked about this recently. I talked to a group of students at Clemson and said, you know, we can fund a single program, which is great. A single program can serve 15 families, which can be very beneficial for those 15 families. But when we partner across community and we have this program that's supporting 15 families and this program that's providing resources to 25 more families, and this program over here that's going into neighborhoods and starting initiatives to change the culture in neighborhoods, that's when we really see change happen. But we've got to be working together to do that, to achieve that. So that's why it matters. Keep that in mind. And we're going to look today at what I have put into 4 different objectives. And I always love to tell people that I'm the daughter of a Baptist preacher. And I think that preachers learn in seminary that every sermon should have 3 or 4 letters starting at their main points. So we've got purpose, people, process, and product today. And we're going to visit purpose and people very briefly because those are the 2 areas that hopefully you have under control. But we're going to revisit them because sometimes we need to be reminded that those are priority areas. And then we'll spend more time kind of sitting with process and product. And those 4 Ps are really, you'll notice some similarities here as we go through this of the 5 conditions of collective impact. So if you're familiar with collective impact, you know some of these things. I am going to use terminology here from Collective Impact 3.0, which is a paper that was put out by the Tamarack Institute out of Canada. A lot of work has been done since the original collective impact paper came out. We've learned lots of lessons. And I know there are some people who get really like high class about you're not doing collective impact exactly right. That's okay. I think that the key points of collective impact are important, but we're all going to modify things a little bit for what works best for us. But I do want us to just think about this terminology a little bit. So the first thing, when we think about purpose and people, those are our first 2 Ps for today. We're going to think about containers for change, which in the original paper talked about having a coordinator or a backbone support infrastructure. That's one of the things that really needs to be in place first, because then we have this community aspiration, which used to be known as a common agenda. And this shift in language really moves us from a managerial paradigm to a little bit more of a movement building paradigm. And I think speaks much more to equity and inclusion and how we operate. So this idea of a community aspiration and thinking about the mission and vision of where we want to go. Then we have inclusive community engagement. And I think that even though it sounds pretty simple, and I love that Scott put this in the chat box, and I recognize Scott because Scott is from Spartanburg. This idea of inclusive community engagement is where we've got to make sure that people who will be receiving the services and resources we're planning for are involved in the planning for the resources and the services. So if I'm doing work to support parents, I need parents at the table when we are doing this collective impact collaborative work to figure out how to best serve that population. So that's one thing. But the other idea of inclusive community engagement is making sure that everyone feels welcome in these conversations. And this originally, from the original paper, was building trust and continuous communication, which is in some ways weird to have those two things together because they could very much stand on their own. But we have to have transparent, clear communication about the work that's happening. But we also have to recognize the importance of building this trust so that everyone feels like they are equals at the table. It can be pretty intimidating for a parent who works at the grocery store and has 3 kids, and they're constantly running around with kids' schedules, that sort of thing. They got busy lives. To then be sitting in a room with CEOs of organizations or policymakers in the community or in the state, that can be intimidating. So we've got to build some trust so that folks all feel like they are equal players in the work. All right, then we have high leverage activities, which used to be mutually reinforcing activities. And I think sort of the difference in this language is moving from just what does everyone do to thinking about what do people do that are highest priorities that meet the greatest level of need, and how can we work together to support those high leverage activities. And then this last one, which is everybody's favorite, this is the shared measurement systems, or now thinking about strategic learning, this is our data collection. And this is an area where I think it's again important to note, I feel like I'm using that term a lot. I'll try to stop using that as much. But we want to think about not just collecting numbers for the sake of having numbers to report to a funder, but what information are we collecting that's really going to help us understand whether or not our process worked effectively so that we can do it better next time. That's key. All right. Looking at purpose and people, we're going to be talking about this idea of putting first things first. That means organizing and executing around your most important priorities. So these are the 2 areas that I said you are hopefully already doing. You're already clear on what your purpose is, but I want to revisit them because I know just for me, I can get caught up in the day-to-day to-do list. And I just realized I meant to erase this. You guys can probably see I have a giant whiteboard in my home office, and it currently has lots of different things written on it to help me prepare for this presentation today. And all of that boils down to me making sure that I am focused on the purpose of why I am here today, and making sure that I know why you guys are here today so that I can help achieve that purpose for you. So we've got to be careful about not getting so caught up in the day-to-day that we forget about why we're doing the day-to-day activities. So we've got to have this laser focus on the purpose of our agency or our organization. Think about what is the big goal of your organization. And we have this, so fabulous strategic plans. We all love a good strategic plan. And I actually have this one blurred out because I don't know that Children's Trust is publicly releasing our new strategic plan yet, but I think they'll let me share this version of it because you can't actually see it. But what I can point out to you here is we have 3 key priority areas across the top in 3 different colors. Then in these circles, we have 5 key performance indicators. Underneath those key performance indicators, we have lists of activities that we are going to do to achieve the KPIs. So this all looks very fancy and important. But if I can't tell you how activity B under key performance indicator 3 helps to achieve our 3 priorities, which ultimately help us address our overall purpose, then something is wrong. We have to be able to connect everything to, at the end of the day, what is our overall purpose and goal. So for Children's Trust, if it's not bringing us closer to the prevention of child abuse and neglect, we don't need to be doing it. And one of the reasons that this is important for the purpose of this conversation is it is super easy to hear about funding opportunities that we get really excited about, but that aren't really going to bring us closer to our goal. The idea of mission drift is real. So thinking about how are we looking to apply for funding that will bring us closer to our goal. And so I'm going to ask Chris now. I pulled up your mission on this slide, Chris, but if you could just talk to us for a second about how it is that you as a coalition, when you were kind of first starting out, how did you land on this mission? What work did you do to get to what the overall purpose of your coalition is?
Okay, so thank you. I was not there in the 60s, I'm not going to lie, but it really has not changed a whole lot. We did go through this rebranding process in 2019, and at that point we had the strategic plan that we put together, and this is when this mission statement kind of was crafted, but the overall mission previously was along the same line. So we've just been dedicated providing local resources and opportunities for building a healthy community. The emphasis in the past has really been health and wellness, and we've looked at some other areas with some partners and putting together especially the CHIP, so the Community Health Improvement Plan that identified really some needs that the community had. So we've tailored, as you're talking about in the strategic plan, some of those more precise objectives are geared towards those needs that we have, but the mission has really been the same for a while. This verbiage is the one that's changed, if you will.
Okay, great. And I love that. I'm so glad that Chris is here, because if you're not familiar with Fairfield Forward, you should just go check out their website and learn about the history. They have been around for a long time. And they started off as establishing a coalition that didn't already exist, which is one of the things that some of you mentioned. How do you, just starting off, get something up off the ground? And one of the things is just knowing that it takes time. And the reason they are where they are is because they put in the time and effort to make this happen. So what we want to look at now is people, still under our first things first. To achieve our big goals, we have to know what other people in our community are doing. We've got to understand, is someone doing work that's similar to ours? Is someone else doing the exact same work that we are doing? I'm going to be honest with you, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone. It drives me crazy when people start new nonprofits that are doing the exact same thing that other nonprofits are focused on doing. Instead of looking at how can we partner up with organizations that are already doing great work to do even better work. It's a little soapbox there. I won't get into any of that. But thinking too about, is anyone doing work that complements what we do? We know that collaboration is the process of 2 or more people, entities, or organizations working together to complete a task or achieve a goal. So in order for us to collaborate, we've got to be connecting with other people. So we can think about this network. And I'll tell you, I really struggled with figuring out which should come first, purpose or people. What you just heard Chris talk about is, as these organizations came together, they helped to develop what this purpose would be. But there was also kind of this, people had in mind what was needed when they came to the table. So there was already a bit of that community aspiration that existed. So we have to have both this network and the purpose operating simultaneously. And so this slide, this brings up a couple of my favorite leadership folks. Thinking about, first of all, who do you know? So who do you know already? Who's already part of your network? And I want you to think too, not just about what organizations are you familiar with. Like, I'm familiar with the United Way of the Piedmont, which is here in Spartanburg County. I'm familiar with Birth Matters, which is a doula program that operates in Spartanburg County. And I'm familiar with the Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System, which is focused on healthcare in Spartanburg County. But more than being familiar with what those organizations do, I know people in those organizations that I can pick up the phone and call if I hear that they're doing something and I want to connect with that work. So who do you know, not just what organizations do you know about? Now, this next question, John Maxwell's a big fan of this. When you meet people, don't just get to know them, but also ask them, who do you know that I should know? Which gets to this idea, Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point, which I know is an old book at this point, he talks about connectors. I'm a big fan of connectors. And all of us have connectors in our lives, whether we think formally of them or not. But there's always this community member that volunteers on every task force and every committee and every team of people that's doing some level of community work. And because of that involvement, they know everyone. And if you sit down and have coffee with them, or you sit down at Ike's here in Spartanburg and have a hamburger with them over lunch, you can say, so this is some of the work that we're looking to be doing. Who do you know that's doing work that it would make sense for us to partner together? And they can make those introductions for you, but we have to be intentional about making those things happen. Now, I know some of you mentioned the challenges that come with pulling together new coalitions. So I want you to think about kind of starting out organizations across your community that are doing great work. So here we see a wide variety. I think I have these light up. Yes. So you see a wide variety of different types of work that are going on. And if we look at all of this, we may say, well, there's not a whole lot of connection between housing assistance and youth leadership. So why would those two organizations send people to be in a room together for my coalition meeting? But here's one of the things that I know in my work is that one thing all of these programs have in common is child abuse prevention. They are all in some form or fashion helping to support children and families, and that's connected to my work. What that means I have to do is engage these organizations, support and appreciate the great work that they are doing, and help them understand how, in addition to their own goal, they are also helping to prevent the abuse of to prevent child abuse and neglect, and why it would matter to us to have them at the table in the conversations that we're having, that we would be missing out by not having them at the table for these conversations. So that gets both to people and purpose. You really have to not just invite someone to engage, but help them understand why you need them in the room for the conversations, because the work that they do matters. It doesn't just mean I'm going to someone and saying, here's what I need you to do for me. It's going to them and saying, because of what you do, you're strengthening this other work that's happening. And I need everybody else in our room to be familiar with who you are and what you do. You've got to think about connecting that people and purpose together. Now, That was a good bit of information. But one of the things that I am going to ask Chris to share here is to tell us a little bit about how you bring on new members, because you have a wide variety of organizations that are represented. And I know Lindsay from Fairfield Forward, I had an opportunity to talk to her for a good while last week. And there are more than 75 organizations, I think, that make up Fairfield Forward. But as new organizations are getting started, kind of what process do you go through to bring on new folks? And do you have current members that advocate to new organizations to come on board and join the work that you're doing?
Yeah, actually, as you were talking about those connectors, I think we had one of those kind of key connectors in my role previously, and he brought myself on, and he just had that vision, that mindset. He's still on the board, continues to if you will, pass that on. One of the biggest things that we do that significantly helps is every month we have a coalition meeting and we have a spotlight organization that gets about 20 minutes to present. So that's usually a great opportunity for organizations that have not been in the community that want to get the word out about what they do to present. And then we offer everybody a networking time as well. So we get we probably have about 20 to 30 members at every single coalition meeting pretty faithfully. So, I mean, it's a great opportunity to highlight the work that's being done, but then also everyone's given that chance to sort of digest it and see how they fit into it. I think those are the key things that we have, and the data piece is key to having our data focused on how we can change and move the needle in certain areas, gives people that clear, purpose that they could have and why they could partner with our organization as well.
Right. And I hope everybody caught this. So there are 75-ish organizations that are represented in Fairfield Forward and are considered dues paying, I believe, coalition members. But there are 25 to 30 that come to monthly coalition meetings. So we get this frustration with folks saying they want to be involved, and then we feel like they're not involved because they aren't coming to our meetings every month. But recognizing that that's still 75 people in the community that know what's happening. And we're going to talk about that again here in just a second. But I want us to think about, this is from John Wooden, who was an amazing basketball coach. But he said that when opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. Now, I don't know about you guys. I've been on both ends of this. I've been part of an organization that scrambled at the last minute to bring partners on board for a grant application we had already filled out. We'd already put together the grant application, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, we've got to have community partners listed here. So who can we call and ask them to sign a letter really fast? And we'll provide them the letter so they can just sign it and we'll submit this, right? We've probably all done that. We may not be proud of it, but it's happened. And I know at the same time, I've also been in the role as a funder of receiving applications from people who scrambled at the last minute to bring on partners and weren't intentional about what that partnership needed to look like. And so because of that, the opportunity for the funding and to do the work presented itself, but we weren't prepared already. We had not already laid some groundwork on what we might want to do and who we might want to work with. Imagine how much easier it would be to complete those grant applications if we already knew, hey, if we have the opportunity to receive funding to implement this evidence-based program in this community, we already have 2 agencies that we're going to call that have expressed interest in doing this. And so we can bring on those partnerships in an intentional way that will make a difference. So we've got to be be planning on the front end so that when opportunity comes, we're already prepared and ready to jump on that. All right, so that was our people and our process. Now we're going to dive a little bit more into thinking about what happens when, I'm going to frame this as what happens when grant money comes our way, okay? Because I think that we all are doing great work, but the funding for our work comes from somewhere. And if you're a foundation, that's amazing because you already have some money to operate with and you're not always having to look for funding from other places. But for most of us, we know we've got this work that we want to do, and we have to go out and figure out how we're going to secure funds to make that happen. So let's think about, we've laid the groundwork of having our clear purpose. We know what it is that we want to achieve. We have some ideas of how we can go about achieving that. We know people, we have a network in the community of folks that we can work with. And now we have this opportunity to apply for funding to do that work with those people in that network. All right, so we have this program, whoa, wrong slide. We have this program process, and number 1 and 2 really kind of go together here. We're just looking at 2 different examples of this. Because it sounds like from your comments, some of you are really like you're a new organization trying to bring a coalition together. Some of you, perhaps for the purposes of a grant, you're trying to form a coalition. Maybe you started a coalition on a previous project and you're trying to maintain momentum to keep it going. Even if maybe now the funding source has changed and the work looks a little bit different, but you're still trying to operate kind of a core group. Or maybe like Fairfield Forward, you've been around for 40 something years and you have solid membership, you know, not just who's engaged at some level, but who's actively participating in the work of the organization. So that's the thinking about the pre-existing coalition. Now we're going to talk about communication flow, which is, so I think communication flow and the funding allocation piece, not exciting stuff, but is absolutely critical to effective coalition and collaboration work. Has to be done. We have to have clear process for communication flow and how we're going to handle funding allocation. So I want to show you, first of all, an example of Children's Trust is working on a project right now in 3 counties across the state. I'm working specifically in Oconee County. So I'm kind of laying out for you here a structure that is partly what Children's Trust established. We established this idea of the backbone organization, a core team, which includes work group leads now, and the coalition itself. So the backbone organization serves as our fiscal sponsor. They are the agency that applied to us for funding. So in Oconee County, our backbone organization is the United Way of Oconee. All right. I work with the United Way of Oconee representative, our backbone organization coordinator. That backbone organization pulled together a core team of community leaders, which for our purposes is actually made up of the levels of the socio-ecological model. So we have a parent, someone who is just there to represent families. We have organizations represented, some community-wide groups, and then we have policymakers, key stakeholders at the policy level at the table that make up that core team. Then the core team actually facilitates the coalition. So while the backbone organization holds the money and handles all of the reporting, the core team drives the work of the coalition. So that takes some of the heat off of the backbone organization. All right. And that's important because that speaks to that inclusion piece. You don't have one person making decisions. for Fairfield Forward, they have the backbone organization of Fairfield Forward. They have a board, which kind of from my lens of looking at that, operates as sort of that core team. And then they have the organization as a whole, which is that coalition. Now, once this coalition had created a plan that they wanted to implement, they then broke into work groups. So we have 3 work groups based on 3 different priority areas. And this is going to matter as we look a little bit into communication flow, but I wanted you to see this structure to give you an idea of the structure if you are just looking to start something new. Because this was a new thing that we developed in the past 3 years out of nothing. There wasn't anything like this that existed before, and we have pulled all of this together. I also want us to think about, as you are thinking towards how you're going to engage people and what the needs of your coalition may be, what structure makes the most sense for you. Now, this tool, which I love, this tool has solved so many problems with coalition building and collaboration for me. We call this the stakeholder engagement wheel, and this is a tool. So I'm a graduate of the Tamarack Institute Community Building Institute, the Tamarack Institute's Community Building Initiative, yes. And they have this amazing tool that really helps handle that problem of folks saying they want to be involved, but then not responding to your emails, not coming to meetings. And you can use this tool in a couple of different ways. One, you can say, as the core team and the backbone organization, we need Sally from X organization over here to be in the loop of the work that we're doing, but we do not need her at every single meeting. I know we have had, so a state representative who we wanted in Oconee County, a state representative who we wanted to know about the work that was happening in the county. So when he was at the State House and had the opportunity to vote on policies or funding initiatives that could ultimately support this work, we wanted him to know what was going on. But we knew without a doubt that he was not going to come to every meeting. And if we asked him if he wanted to be involved in the work, he might say no, just because he knew he didn't have the time to commit to it. So we could go to him and say, look, we have different levels of involvement for this work. We just want to know if you are interested in staying in the loop so that you can support the work in any way that you have the time to support the work with. And ideally, what we need is for you to be a voice for us at the State House. All right. So we've given him kind of an easy out, already knowing up front that he's not going to be able to make an intense level of commitment. So that's one way you can use this, is you can invite people in at certain levels. You can also ask people to tell you at which level they want to be engaged. So going to someone and saying, like, if in work that I was doing in Spartanburg County, if I went to the Spartanburg Regional Healthcare System, which is now Medical Center of the Carolinas or something, they keep changing their name, but they do great work in Spartanburg County. But I know they have a lot going on. And so they may not be able to send somebody to every single meeting. So if I just say to them up front, how much time do you have to be committed to this? Could you just tell us at which of these levels you really think you can be engaged? And are you interested in being involved at all? When you give them the opportunity to say, yeah, I think that, and we've all been in this place before too, where there's some really cool project happening in your community and you can be super excited about it and you want to be involved with it, but you just don't have the time to be part of a monthly meeting for the coalition, and then a monthly meeting for the work group, and then work outside of that or special events related to the overall project. You just don't have that type of time capacity or bandwidth, somebody used that term, to commit to it. If I can just say to you, I want to be supportive of this work. I want to get your monthly email updates so that I know what's going on, and I'm happy to participate in any special events you have when I can. If I can tell you that up front, I feel better because I've let you know what you can expect from me, and you feel better because you're not sending me an email invitation to every single meeting and then really upset when I don't come and get frustrated with that. So, stakeholder engagement wheel, and all of these tools that I'll share from the Tamarack Institute. If you just go to their website, you can Google Tamarack Institute, and you can look up stakeholder engagement wheel. And this image, the graphic, actually comes with a page of instructions ahead of time. So it gives you sort of an overview of ways that you can use this tool along with the graphic of the tool itself. Love that. All right, when we think about communication flow, this is another example of how our project, specifically what we're doing in Oconee County right now, how it operates. And this is important because one of the things that I have learned in working with coalitions is we either communicate with folks too much and they get overwhelmed with getting emails from us every single day, or we don't communicate enough. And I have this personal, and everybody operates differently. Let me say that first. And I know that everybody operates differently and you need to do what meets your needs. I find that if I am part of a coalition that only meets quarterly, that's kind of the only time I'm thinking about the work of that project, is once a quarter. And so for me, it's tough for that initiative to stay on my radar because I'm not engaged with it often enough to really be involved at the level you might want me to be involved. And I find too that when we're just meeting quarterly, it can feel like we're just getting updates on work that somebody else is doing. And I'm not really feeling like I'm contributing myself. Again, that's just me. I know that having just quarterly meetings for projects makes it easier for people to say they can be engaged. But if you're using that stakeholder engagement wheel and you're kind of giving people that heads up on this would be the time commitment if you're on our core team and you're really operating at that level, so they know up front. And if they say, yes, I still want to be part of your core team because I understand that's going to mean at least 2 meetings a month for me, plus some work outside of those meetings, and I can commit to that, then you actually have folks following through on that more often than not, which is great. So we operate with, first of all, there is a monthly backbone organization and coordinator meeting with me. I'm the coach for this project, so I meet with those 2 individuals once a month. The week after that, we have a core team meeting where our core team, which is made up of some community leaders, representatives of our socio-ecological model, but also all of our work group leads, we meet once a month with them. Then our work groups, our backbone organization is not part of those work groups unless they want to just pop into work group meetings every once in a while. The work groups members themselves have 1 meeting a month. So that's a smaller commitment for them. And then if they're planning special events or activities, then they're involved in those also, but that's their level of commitment. So our core team members are committing up front to 2 meetings a month, plus time in planning. Our work group members are committing to 1 meeting a month, and then a quarterly full coalition meeting when all of our work group and core team members come together. And that meeting is usually a half of that is a training meeting where we're teaching them new content and new information that will support the work that they're doing. And they're getting updates on what our other work groups are doing so that they can make the connections with that overall working towards the main purpose, what other folks are doing, and then what they're doing, and really thinking about how they can collaboratively work together. And then I've shown you two here about the emails that they get, number of emails that they get. We are careful about not bombarding folks with emails. So the goal is that core team members get one email a month. They get a meeting reminder, which is just a meeting reminder and agenda up front. Then they get the minutes from the meeting afterwards. And then if there's some other special event or activity coming up, they'll get an additional email about that. But other than that, they're not getting tons and tons of emails from us. But that's because of the purpose of our coalition. Chris and Fairfield Forward have a slightly different communication flow process, and I'm going to have him share that with you in a minute. And then our work groups are getting monthly emails too. They'll get a meeting reminder up front. So technically 2 emails, meeting reminder up front with agenda, and then meeting minutes after the meeting. And then coalition meetings, they're getting agenda and reminder for the meeting up front, and then meeting minutes afterwards. So this is how we are being very transparent about all of the work that is going on. Every coalition member should very easily be able to find out what anyone else in this coalition is doing. None of that is secretive. Any process about how funding is decided on, that's information that is available to everyone. If people have questions about anything, lots of people within this circle should be able to answer those questions. So that's our communication flow. Now, when we think about funding allocation, and this is where I know that funding allocation with the grant application process can get a little bit tricky, because we are writing those grant applications, often submitting a budget to say, this is where funding is going to go. If we have the opportunity to submit an application and say, this is the work that we're going to fund with this money, but we haven't decided yet who's going to do this work, that's the ideal scenario. Or even better than that, which makes it more ideal, is if you have organizations that you have established partnerships with ahead of time. You've done the first things first, you've prepared for the opportunity, you know these are folks that we want doing the work that's going to fulfill the requirements of this grant and also bring us closer to our big goal, our overriding purpose. And this is how we're going to divvy out that funding. I love the process that Fairfield Forward uses for allocating funding, and I'm going to let Chris tell you about that. But for this, and this is actually kind of an example, not to steal Chris's thunder, but I saw a recent grant application that they submitted to the Central Carolina Community Foundation related to COVID relief. So we think about their COVID-19 response. They've got a coalition with all of these organizations represented. All of these organizations could be playing a role in the COVID-19 response. But in the immediate needs of COVID, what they identified from talking to coalition members is these are some specific areas that really need some special attention right now. And for any of us, we could look and say, okay, and one thing that might not have occurred to alcohol and drug misuse services is the fact that families are running out of diapers. This is still a challenge right now because of shipping shortages, challenges with shipping, and people can't afford diapers. And when that's a challenge, it causes problems in a lot of these other areas. So we need to figure out how to make sure that parents have the number of diapers they need for their kids. Food insecurity, we saw a lot of that right after COVID hit because people they weren't getting money from their jobs. And so food banks became a really big deal. And then housing assistance, people paying their rent and utilities. Those were some areas that had to be addressed too. So full coalition, all of the organizations that are represented, overall goal of providing local resources to support a healthy community. Of that, folks could agree on these are 3 key priorities for right now, and this is where we want that funding to go. I am going to ask though, and Chris, I hope I didn't mess that up too bad. That was my understanding from talking to Lindsay and reading the grant application. But I want you to tell us a little bit about that application process for the sub grants that you guys use, because I don't think everyone uses this idea of sub grants or mini grants when they get funding.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't talk to Lindsay about that, so you got me with the.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So yeah, we really we had a lot of help from United Way. I'll just go ahead and throw that out there. They were fantastic in really helping us to navigate the process because it was, everything going on at once. But we did really focus on, okay, who are the community partners that are willing to work with this grant? So we put out kind of an all call and said, what are y'all's priorities? What could you do to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in the community? So we received a bunch of, if you will, sub-grant applications. We then met as an executive committee and, came up with, well, these are the priorities for this community. And the thing was that kind of weeding through a number of the applications and saying, well, this is already something another partner is doing. So we would give those applicants that feedback as well. And then from there, we worked with what monies we were allocated. We met again as the executive committee and then, had to cut some of the stuff. And then again, through that process, we worked with the applicants and said, I know you asked for 15,000. We're not able to do that given the amount of funding, but this is another opportunity that you could partner with this other organization that's also doing something. There were some of those unique partners, like you talked about, the diapers in particular. There was only really one applicant that had that, and we do have a significant need in the community. So it was just really utilizing the kind of collective knowledge of what the community needed, getting all the information from community partners on what they could provide, and then from there, sort of dwindling, if you will, sadly, the dollars. But we do have a partnership agreement that we put in place as well to I guess sort of put them on notice too, that we are accepting this grant on your behalf, but here's the expectations in receiving these monies. So having that laid out helps for that clear delineation of duties, if you will. Right.
Which goes perfectly into you set me up for this last section. So thank you for that.
Okay.
And I love the idea that they used a grant application process themselves. So they had this funding that they had applied for, and they offered up a grant application and RFP for coalition members to be able to apply, who knew this is an area that we can address. So that's a really unique way to do it. That's not how it always operates, but I was excited to hear that that's their process, because I think that that's a really neat way to do it. And I would bet that if any of you guys were interested in seeing their sub-grant application, they might be willing to share that with you. And that could probably go through the Central Carolina Community Foundation if that's something that they want to share that you'd be interested in. So for this last part, I've got 4 minutes to talk about measurement and reporting. We've got to be looking at what we will measure, how we will measure it, with whom we will share the measurement, and who will report the measurement. So you just heard from Chris, they outlined in those applications what the responsibility of those applicants if they receive funding would be. This is crucial, and it sounds pretty simple, but I will say it doesn't always happen. And I know, like, I have worked with people, and I still do, because this is just sort of how some people operate. We have a meeting and we say, okay, this is the work that we're going to do, and we decide this is the work we're going to do. But if we don't decide who in the room is going to do what, that work never happens. Ever. Because we all leave knowing this is the work we're going to do, but nobody knows what my role in this work will be. And so work doesn't get done. So we've got to be thinking about who is going to do work. And it's helpful if we have, for the purposes of a funder, if there is one key contact with a group that's receiving funding, so that the funder's not dealing with 5 different people. It could have been a bit of a nightmare if CCCF was receiving reports from every group that received funding through Fairfield Forward. But all of that information ran up through Fairfield Forward, and then there are standard forms to collect that data and that information. I would encourage you to think about in terms of process, not just outcome data, but process data. This is one tool that you can also use in a number of different ways, because you can use this before you start a project and have people tell you what their level of collaboration has been in the past with the community. So the little blue dots on here are, you can do an activity where you put this up and have folks put a little blue dot on the way they think that the community or the coalition has operated previously. But you can also use this tool at the end of your project to have folks tell you, this is how we think we collaborated or worked together over the course of this project. Because this gives you a sense, if you get to the end of an initiative where you were collaborating, your goal was to collaborate with other groups, and people just felt like they got to the compete stage, then the next time you do this, you need to make some changes to do this even better. And here's a quick example of a measurement tool that Children's Trust has used. We look at what did we do and assess what we did, those outcomes, how well we did it, so the quality of the work that we do, and then did we really make a difference in that work, looking at our policies, people, and or practices better because of the work that we did. Okay, we're running out of time here. We're at 11 o'clock. So I'll have this go out as a link in an email from Hannah, if that's all right with Hannah. This is a really amazing tool that lays out for you step by step how a work group or coalition can operate. It gives you meeting agenda templates. It gives you notes from meetings, your minutes from meetings, how that template can look. It helps you go through the process of determining your measurement, what data you're going to collect, providing templates for what that data can look like. But again, the importance is having that process in place so that you can do that effectively and provide the information that shows that you ultimately got the product that you hoped to achieve. So that was all of that work. And now I'm going to hand things back over to Hannah. Thank you guys very much for letting me share all of this, and then for being engaged in the chat with some of the information you shared there too. And thank you to Chris for being involved in this, being kind of thrown in when Lindsay wasn't going to be able to be here.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Dana and Chris, for all of that information. Again, I will be in contact with Dana in order to make sure that you all get that information that is accessible to you all. I hope that you all learned something. We want to be considerate of your time, so we see that it is 11:01, but please feel free, since Dana's contact is right here, to ask her any questions utilizing that email, as well as we'll make sure to get you that information out. But I hope you all have a great day, and until next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll get you that email with links to all of those things that I shared, so you can share those.
Perfect. Sounds good. And then I will stop the recording.